there's an awful lot of consistency of me shooting these videos and talking with you when it's quite late outside. Might as well just name that late night talks. I don't know, let's get started. Amateur leagues is not something that people awfully talk about. Reason to that being is because amateur leagues is not exactly a part of the world of pro broadcasting and pro casting. Logically, because it's amateur leagues and therefore it's amateur broadcasts and amateur casters as well. But it's actually quite important to talk about these things because they give you the best possible experience before diving into the world of professional casting. My name is Dr. Brumman, and let's talk about amateur leagues. Now, to give you a little bit of Wikipedia sort of definition of what that is, I've actually have this written down in front of myself, and it states, amateur leagues is a set of community tournaments where people give their best shot at making a professional broadcast. Minding you, I came up with that definition. I don't know whether it is somewhat of a definition or not, but I think that describes the topic really, really well, because without looking into details, this is pretty much how it looks like. Paychecks are quite debatable. This is a topic that we're going to touch upon a little bit later when we're going to talk about pros and cons going into the amateur leagues. And the level of the broadcast preparation is also variable, extremely variable, and there's no real way to categorize it, no real way to give it a good way of definition or finding a middle ground in it. Essentially, the definition that I've gave you pretty much explains everything you need to know in a nutshell without diving into much details. But if you do want to dive in a little bit of details and see how amateur casting helps you become a pro caster and gives you the chance to become pro, then let's talk about it a little bit more deeply. Before we're going to talk about it deeply, though, I would like to point out first and foremost where to find such gigs, where to find those opportunities to work, whether with a paycheck or without a paycheck, depending on what level you are and what kind of already, let's say, work experience, professional work experience you have behind your belt. But essentially, what you need to do is to go to broadcast.gg. I'll put the link to it into the description, and you'll be able to find everything you need to know over there with paid, unpaid, and paid entry level opportunities. Minding you, this is not an advertisement. This is literally the place where I've been looking for quite a bit of gigs when I was beginning in my casting journey just a few years ago, 2 years ago to be fair. And it pretty much gave me the very good idea of where am I supposed to be going and what am I supposed to be doing really. With that being said, again, the link is in the description, so if you want to go and take a look at it yourself, then I highly encourage you to do so, especially for those who, you lot who's trying to become casters. That is a very useful link for all of you, so you may just as well go and check it out. Minding you, there's not only League of Legends, there's also other disciplines that you can try to work in case you are looking for a job in those disciplines. You have something like Rainbow Six Siege, you have Smash Bros, you have Counter-Strike, Overwatch, I believe as well, Valorant. I've seen it repeatedly popping up there as well. So if you want a job not just connected to League of Legends where I work, then this is pretty much where you're supposed to be going. Now let's try to break it down and take a look at what is actually amateur league. So we've already gave it a definition, but what it really means. So what it really means is that we have a set of something that is trying to look like a professional broadcast and a professional league. So that means we have players, we have organizations, or players that are forming these organizations, and sometimes we have coaches with them as well. We have somewhat of a tournament format that we're working with, mainly those normal group stages, and then not group stages, but elimination stages, maybe sometimes even group stages if you wanted. And then you're coming into the playoffs where you have bigger series, like best of 5 series or best of 3 series, again, depending from league to league, it varies. And then, of course, semifinals and finals. This is pretty much a standard way of looking at things. And this is going to be a very important moment for you if you're moving from those YouTube videos that we are mainly working on as caster beginners mainly because of the fact that when you're doing those YouTube videos, then what you can is revert back. You can take a look at what you have done, and if you want, you can redo it a little bit better or maybe a little bit worse, depending on your level and depending on how well do you understand what you're supposed to be doing. You're working in a fixed point of time when the only person you rely on is you, because everything else has been already done by someone else. Now, with those amateur leagues, this is not necessarily the case, and why I am saying that is actually really simple. I'm saying this because it is actually quite different. You have production, you have casters. Those games are most of the time being played live. You don't really cast pre-recorded games. Sometimes you do, depending, again, on how the schedules look like, but most of the times things are happening live right there in front of you. There's a show for the viewers that mostly consist of players, the friends of the players, the friends of the casters, the friends of the production, pretty much the friends of a friend of a friends of a friends. That's mainly how things are looking like in some local communities. And with that being said, it means that there's a lot of things that sort of weigh out of the fact that it's a live show, of the fact that now you don't really have that fixed point of time, or in time rather, that you can work with. Here, you're supposed to be able to do things on the fly, and not all the times the environment is going to be the best. That is mainly one of the biggest reasons why these local community tournaments, these amateur leagues, are actually quite important, because they teach you how to work with these very, sometimes harsh even, things and problems and opportunities and whatnot. So to sum it up in somewhat of a way, you have a tournament, a format of that tournament going, for example, from 1 to 2 months. You have players, you have the organizers, you have the production, and you have casters. Mainly, it's all in the Discord server, and you don't really have to worry about how to connect with all of those people and how to do it. And everything is pretty much being relied on going there in time, in Discord, with good, stable internet connection, and then somehow people make the entire show happen. Now, with that being said, let's take a look at the pros and the cons as well, because that is probably the biggest thing that we can try and talk about, mainly because that's where those debatable things come in point, especially in pros, because in cons, it's relatively straightforward and quite easy to understand, because first are the cons that we can talk about, and first things first, there is most of the time no paycheck. The reason to that is quite simple, because again, it's a locally run tournament. Most of the times there's not going to be a lot of money in it. You don't really going to have grants. You're not going to have people supporting it from the outside. You're not going to have those sponsors in there, and mainly sponsors are the viewers, which is not necessarily a stable income. And because of that, a lot of these little leagues that exist, they don't have any payage. They don't really have any payment coverage, while the amount of work that's been put into that league most of the times is actually quite big. Of course, there are some that are able to give you this symbolic payment for the work that you're doing, but you don't really rely on that, because that's not necessarily the case. When it comes to those paid opportunities that I've been talking about in the Brockers GG server, most of the times you do this for the local organizers that are making the show happen, and a lot of times it happens in America. A lot of these little opportunities, they pop up from America, and that's a bit of a different point. When it comes to Europe, a lot of these leagues, they don't have any sponsorship. So if you are going to work for some amateur league, then you should be prepared. Then most likely you're not going to get paid for the work that you're doing. And probably one of the biggest cons that you should talk about from a working standpoint, from working experience point, is the amount of the organizational hell that you're going to be coming through. And there's going to be a lot of it. And I cannot even stress this enough, how much of that is going to pop up. Again, because you have so many people trying to do the work, and because of the fact that most of them are not going to get paid, things can turn nasty really quickly from the organizers' part, from the casters' part, from players' part as well. And just making sure that everything works intact is going to be one hell of a ride. And if everything is working smoothly, then that is a really big success. You can have players that are not going to arrive in time. You can have internet outage and somebody is going to be disconnected. You can have lack of producer and a streamer, essentially somebody who's going to run the entire broadcast, forecasters to do their job, and for the players, for their games to be transmitted. He can have somewhat of a problem as well. You can also run into the fact that the casters have told you that, yeah, yesterday they could do the game today, and now they can't. Some of the casters may just fail to answer the call when somebody says, okay, we're casting in 3 hours, and you are supposed to be here. Are you coming or not? And they don't respond to you at all. This can happen as well. And that is somewhat of a normal situation, because again, nobody is obliged to do that work, and because of that you can't really rely on the fact that everybody's going to be doing their job responsibly, especially if something more important has came up. Maybe it's family matters, maybe it's work matters. Doesn't really play part in it, I would say. Essentially, if you can think about any type of an organizational problem that you can run into, then most likely you will run into it at some point sooner or later, because there's pretty much no way to avoid it. And you have to be really not stressful about it. You have to be really resilient about it. You have to be able to withhold all of that amount of negativity around it if you really want to try and participate in the work there, if you really want to try and gain that work experience of working live on air, something that YouTube most likely is not going to give you. Now, pros is something a little bit harder to dive into, because these are very debatable, because they are very important for you as a person who's growing in the industry and in the ecosystem. But since there are these two very big cons going on in there, you can say that they might even outweigh the pros for someone who's trying to do their job. But essentially, if you really want to gain that experience without suffering a lot of no's and a lot of declines from the from the employers, then you should try to settle down with it, especially because of the fact that organizational hell is not going to go out from anywhere, mainly because esports as an industry, as itself, deals with so many people and so many timetables. Really, you have to understand that things will happen one way or the other. Now, talking about the pros, one of the biggest thing is an absolutely fantastic work experience. Not only is this first standpoint of how a professional broadcast look like, but just from the idea that now you're going to be involved into a lot of different things, that you're going to be involved in your workplace as well. It's the organization, it's the narratives, it's casting itself, it's dealing with some of the problems on air, and so on and so forth. It covers pretty much a lot of ground, and because of that, that is this fantastic work experience coming from. When you're going to go into the bigger gigs, when you're going to be doing gigs for bigger companies, you will be pretty much prepared almost for everything, mainly because of the fact that you've already been through something like that in those amateur leagues. It shapes you, it forges you, it prepares you for all the atrocities that may happen just because of that human factor in the work that we're doing. Second big pro is, or second of those big pros from my eyes at the very least, is the elevating craft segments, elevating your craft segment that we're going into. And this is quite important to understand, that it really depends on how are you able to approach your work, the work of others, and just, again, things that surround you. Because not only are you going to get that practice experience live on air, and you'll get to see how people are reacting, and you'll get that instant feedback from people that were listening to you, but it also gives you this practicing moment of it. It's not practice makes perfect, it's practice that helps you to become better. It's practice that helps you understand what you're supposed to be doing in order to achieve higher results. And that's something that nobody's going to take it away from you. And especially because of the fact that you're going to be dealing with a lot of different partners. You're not going to have those standing duos, most likely, that are just going to work all the time. You will need to be a little bit more flexible. You'll need to be able to go, okay, today I'm working with a different partner and I need to find a way how to make the entire thing happen. There can be also pauses. There can be pre-shows that you will need to do. There is going to be, for example, bad behavior of your even partner caster, or maybe the players towards the other team, to the other players. All sorts of different situations, sometimes controversial situations, are going to come up, and it's going to be a test for you to actually try and get through that problem that occurs, and which is really essentially good, because if that would have happened on your real work, the punishments for everyone involved might have been quite bigger. In those amateur leagues, people are a little bit more forgiving because everybody is learning around you, and so do you. Because of that, you get to try those tests and you get to forge your work ethic, something that is going to be very important as you go on, because work ethic, in my book, for example, is the showcase of your professionalism. It's the way how you just make people aware of the fact that you are a professional. Think of the amateur leagues like your experimenting lab. It gives you opportunity to try and experiment with your casting, with the craft, with the broadcasts, with pretty much everything involved. It gives you this precious time to actually spend and work a little bit on yourself and your understanding of how broadcasts are supposed to be looking like. And you don't really need to do it on the daily basis. You're not going to have those big show days like you have in the LEC or in the regional leagues or anywhere else. It's not going to be 2 days, 5 hours each. You need to find partners. You need to find a way how you're going to combine and build these very big, strong narratives. Of course, you can do that even in those amateur leagues, but you don't necessarily have to. And that's what is so amazing about it, because it gives you that freedom of experimenting and finding your essential style. How do you want to work, and how do you want to approach your work? And talking about those challenges at work, you can also run into the fact that there's no producer. Not every single league is able to find a person who's going to be streaming for them and working with the graphics and working with the statistics and working with Discord or vMixes or any other software that people might be using in order to make the whole broadcast happen. So a lot of times, shoutcasters themselves, people who are working in front of the camera, are forced to do that just in order to stream the game. Forced, probably in quotes a little bit, because, well, nobody's actually forcing them. It's their choice to do that or not to do that. It's their choice to do the work or not to do the work. So essentially, you may even run into this as well, which is also going to help you, because when you will work with an actual producer, you will know what can you ask from that person, or how you should work with that person, even how to treat that person as well. And you will always be able to at least evaluate a little, is that person doing a good job or a bad job? And I have to be very grateful that for now, every producer I've worked with was an absolute joy. Now, another little topic that I just want to quickly touch upon is the Division 3, 4, and 5s for the regional leagues like Ultraliga, Prime League, LFL, maybe even Greek League, anything really. And the reason I want to touch on it is really simple. It's not the community amateur leagues, but it's somewhat of the same quality in terms of broadcasts, but it's also very, very good because you're working for the actual company. You can be working for NLC, pretty much theoretically. But when you write that into your CV, you can just say, I worked on NLC Division 3. Yes, nobody really cares about Division 3 other than the teams that are in Division 3 or 4 or 5, but it's a good look in your CV, which is also quite important. And some of those teams are very happy when there's someone who's willing to stream for them, there's something who's willing to cut the games for them, and oftentimes there are some very good organizations behind that help you to actually make sure that the broadcast looks the best way possible. Yes, it's not going to be the most professional, but at least semi-professional or somewhat good-looking, presentable amateur. This is something that you can aim for, and it will be a little bit more strict. It will be just a little bit more precise. And again, you can look for those gigs in the Broadcast GG or Twitter. Another thing where a lot of different things appear, especially from the organizations that are participating in different divisions, in different leagues. They often post it there. So if you keep a track on it, you might do that favor for them. And that favor might be even exchanged when somebody's going to be looking for a caster. They will remember about you, which is quite important as well. That'll probably wrap it up right there. Amateur leagues is a very hard topic to explore, and it can be explored even further detailed than this from the way I feel about it. We can talk a bit more about viewership, we can talk a bit more about the way that things look and the organization and how it can elevate your casting, but the general idea how things are looking is probably something like that. So I hope it helped you find the answer to a question: do you like to participate in an amateur league or not? And I do highly recommend that, because I've been there and it's probably one of the most important experiences that I've had in my casting career. I also would like to thank SLE, one of the leagues that I've been casting for a lot in my beginner years, for providing me those clips from their shows that they were doing. They are very generous. Thank you for that, and thank you for being one of my first homes, actually, as well. And that pretty much wraps it up. So thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for listening. I hope it was informative for you, and I hope I answered some of your questions. My name is Dr. Brumman, and if you like that type of educational content when I talk about shoutcasting from my perspective and I learn together with you about this entire world, then I invite you to subscribe, like that video, hit the notification bell, and I will hear from you and you'll hear from me next time.